We are coming to 2 Corinthians today. We're going to be looking at the second part of chapter 8, starting with verse 16. And in this section of Scripture, remember, Paul is talking about the gifts that are being collected for the poor in Jerusalem. And Paul is giving instructions to the church at Corinth how to think about these gifts, and is useful not only for the church at Corinth, as Paul describes how to think about it, but also for us today to understand the idea behind giving. Now, this section of Scripture isn't something that would normally be preached through, but because we're just preaching through the book, we come upon this section of Scripture. And the idea of giving is something that goes through the Bible. In Proverbs chapter 28, Proverbs 28:7, here it's written, "He that giveth unto the poor shall not lack, but he that hideth his eyes shall have many a curse." So these are the promises in the Bible related to giving. And yet somehow, in spite of these promises, we sometimes find it hard to give. But God promises that who gives unto the poor shall not lack. But if we hide our eyes from the poor, curses will fall upon us. And yet, that's sometimes our inclination is to look away when we see a problem. But the Bible encourages not to do that. Now, concerning this particular gift, when we were in 1 Corinthians, Paul talks a little bit about his plans for this gift to the churches in Jerusalem. In 1 Corinthians chapter 16, at the end of 1 Corinthians, Paul has these words, "Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given an order to the churches of Galatia, even so do you." So there was a famine in Jerusalem, and Paul was collecting money from the churches to help the church at Jerusalem. And he had given order to the churches in Galatia, the region of Galatia. And now he says, as he gave the order to the churches in Galatia to collect for the poor, he's also giving the same instruction to the Corinthians to collect the poor. And Paul says, "Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store," and notice this important phrase, "as God has prospered him." And let's just pause here. The idea of tithing is not contained in the New Testament. The idea of tithing, the law of tithing, is an Old Testament injunction. In the New Testament, the idea is give as God has prospered you. There are no limits. There are no limits. It's just as God has prospered you, that's how you should give. Continuing on, and Paul says, do this every week, lay aside a little bit, so that there be no gatherings when I come. So as Paul didn't want to have a big rally, a big pep rally when he arrived to collect this offering all at once. He was encouraging the saints to set a little bit aside every week for the needs of the poor. Just set a little bit aside, and then when he comes, he'll take whatever was set aside, and that will go to the churches at Jerusalem. "And when I come, whomsoever ye shall approve by your letters, them will I send to bring your liberality unto Jerusalem." So this verse impacts what we're going to read today. And what Paul is saying here, and when I come, when Paul arrives in Corinth, whomsoever ye shall approve by your letters, them will I send to bring your liberality unto Jerusalem. So what Paul is asking the Corinthian church, he says, pick some men, pick some faithful people who will be able to deliver this gift to Jerusalem. Now we're going to dive into this much more in this morning's text. But that's the overall instruction. Is that some particular men who are trusted by the church are going to be entrusted with this responsibility to bring the church to Jerusalem. What Paul doesn't want to happen is that he takes the offering, this gift, collects it himself and leaves. That's what he doesn't want that to happen. He wants to make sure there's a party of trusted people around to handle this gift. And then Paul says, "And if it be meet that I go also, they shall go with me." So the traveling plans of Paul here are a little uncertain. Paul doesn't know if the party taking the gift into Jerusalem, if they're going to be together. Paul doesn't know if this party taking the gift to Jerusalem is going to be going on ahead or after he goes. We're not sure what the plans are here. And that also is helps us to understand these verses better. Now, coming to 2 Corinthians, the second part of 2 Corinthians chapter 8. This is what Paul writes here. But thanks be to God, which put the same earnest care into the heart of Titus for you. So Titus is one of the men who selected to bring this gift to Jerusalem. And what Paul is saying is, thank God that God put this care into Titus. Look, it was God which put the earnest care into the heart of Titus for you. So if we have desires to do the will of God, those desires came from God. You see this throughout Scripture, that those desires to do the will of God are given as a gift of God. God put that into your heart. That didn't come from yourself. That is from God. And we need to recognize this because it's so hard to, it's very easy to skip over that. It's very easy to not realize where this desire to do the will of God came from. And we should thank God when we have this desires in our heart. We should thank God that He put the desire to do His will in our heart. Moving on to the next verse. Now, look, God put the desires in His heart, but look, for indeed He accepted the exhortation. But being more forward of His own accord, or more earnest, this word can also be translated earnest, of His own accord, He went unto you. So God put the desire in His heart, and Titus accepted the responsibility that entailed. Titus, more forward, look, of his own accord. So God had a role in this, and Titus has a role in this. We cooperate with God to do the will of God upon this earth. This is a profound truth that can escape those who are not observant, that are not seeing this, that don't recognize this. God put the desire into Titus, and Titus of his own accord embraced this responsibility. Continue with verse 18. So Paul says, and we have sent him with the brother. So there's another person. There's actually going to be three, but this is the second person. We have sent with him the brother. So there's a second person in the party who Paul simply identifies as the brother. So apparently the church at Corinth knew who Paul was referring to here, and many commentators speculate that this was Luke. There's no way to know for sure, but a lot of people think that this was Luke. And this is how Paul describes this brother, whose praise is in the gospel throughout all the churches. And that's a little bit of that awkward King James construction. And what this means is that the churches were praising this brother because of his work in sharing the gospel. This brother was sharing the gospel. He was a very, very good and gifted at sharing the gospel, at communicating gospel truths. People were thankful for that. And so this brother was well known, and this was the second person of the party who was going to manage this money. So this is the brother. And now here we have, in verse 19, we come to this, and not only that, so he's not only a brother who is praised in gospel throughout all the churches, but who was also chosen of the churches to travel with us. So the churches chose this brother. It wasn't Paul appointed him. The churches chose him. And this is important because if you imagine you have a large gift, and this is the ancient days, when they would carry this gift in form of gold or silver or some kind of coin. And you're going to be traveling many miles, hundreds of miles with this gift through rugged terrain, in danger of robbers, in danger of being shipwrecked, in danger of wild animals, in danger of streams, and all these hazards on the road. Do you want to give this to just anybody? No. You want to give this to somebody that you know and somebody that you trust who's going to be faithful to deliver this gift to the destination for what it's intended for. So that's what Paul is saying here. All the churches came together and chose this brother. This was a brother that the churches, somebody that the people trusted, the people felt good about entrusting this person with this gift. Travel with us with this grace. So this grace, this is the gift. The gifts of God for the church are the grace of God on the church. God gives these gifts, and these are thought of as the grace of God. God gives grace to the church. And this grace, which is administered by us. So we have a responsibility, like Titus had a responsibility to accept the calling, to accept the assignment that was given to him, the desire that was put in his heart. Paul and his party is expected to administer the grace of God. And look, he's administering the grace of God to the glory of the Lord. So you have here the grace of God administered by the saints of God for the glory of God. And that is something that repeats again throughout the Bible. You see this idea. The grace of God administered by the saints of God for the glory of God. And the declaration of your ready mind. So Paul says these things are given. They are administered to us by the glory of the same Lord. So it also speaks to the willingness of the saints at Corinth to give this gift. Coming to verse 20. Now Paul says here, avoiding this. So this is the idea that Paul was taking a precaution. Paul was taking a precaution. The reason there were so many people in this is that Paul wanted to be on guard that no man should blame us in this abundance which is administered by us. That's why there were so many people, very clearly. And you know this today. This is something intuitively, that if you see somebody who is collecting a large sum of money, putting it in their pocket and walking out the door, that opens your mind to start asking questions. What are they doing with that money? Where is the accountability? And so we want to make sure that there is some responsibility, accountability, multiple people involved in managing this money. Speaking of this topic, John Calvin has this quote. I have to read this quote. John Calvin says, "There is nothing that leaves a man so open to unfavorable surmises than the management of public money." That's what he's driving at here. That if you have this public money in your charge, in your trust, it opens the door for people to start speculating on your motives and whatnot. And Paul wants to avoid that. Paul wants to take precautions against that so that no man should blame us in this abundance which is administered by us. Continuing with the same idea, providing for honest things, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. So these are the honest things that Paul is providing for. He recognizes this temptation. He recognizes the dangers or the threats inherent in this task that he's undertaking to manage this large amount of money. And he wants to guard against any mischief going on. And so that's why there's multiple people involved. And Paul intentionally does this. He providing for honest things. And we should take lesson from this as we manage our money. And I'm very thankful for the people, the women who manage the money here, who count the money, take care of the money. When I was in pastor licensing school, one of the things that was hammered into us was the pastor should not handle money. Don't take money home. Don't be involved in the counting of the money, the management of the money. Let somebody else do that. That was one of the points brought out in pastor licensing school, not to start handling money. And Paul is, and that's taken from Paul's example. Verse 22. Now there's a third brother, verse 22. And we have sent with them our brother. There's another person here, our brother, Paul says, whom we have oftentimes proved diligent in many things, but now much more diligent upon the great confidence which I have in you. So there's the church's representative, and there's the representative that Paul assigns from his party, and there's Titus. There's just three of them. The three of them taking on this responsibility. There's our brother, and this is another brother. Paul describes them, whom we have oftentimes proved diligent. This wasn't a new person who just happened to show up and just happened to have spare time in his schedule to take on this responsibility. No, this was somebody that Paul knew. He has trusted. He had proven himself diligent in many things before. And so, because he had proven himself diligent in many things, this gave Paul confidence to invest him with this responsibility. But now much more diligent upon the great confidence which I have in you. Continuing verse 23. Whether any do inquire of Titus. So, if the church at Corinth start to ask questions about Titus, this is what Paul says. Titus, he is my partner and fellow helper concerning you. So Paul wants them to know that Titus is a partner of Paul. Whether concerning you or our brethren be inquired of, they are the messengers of the church and the glory of Christ. So Paul is heading off. He's forestalling any complaints or questions about Titus and who Titus is. Paul is saying that Titus is his partner in the ministry to help deliver these gifts. And the chapter concludes in verse 24. Wherefore, show ye to them and before the churches the proof of your love and of our boasting on your behalf. And here, Paul is simply encouraging the churches at Corinth to love these brothers. He's encouraging the churches at Corinth to show themselves, to show their character true. The gospel, how the gospel has worked in their life, to love these brothers and to share abundantly with them for the gifts at the church in Jerusalem. And this is the Lord's grace working in people's lives. The Lord gives this grace to work in our lives, and this is the provision of God. It's the provision of God to take care of the saints. That's what we're seeing here. How God works in people, through people, to take care of the saints, to take care of his church. And this is where faith comes in. We have faith. We have faith in God that he's going to take care of us no matter what the circumstances are.